Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. There are no fire alarms planned, so if there is a fire alarm, it's real. Please meet by Queen Victoria. We have two members of the public. So this is being live streamed, and we know we have one person watching from over the other side. So Scott, hello. But we have two members of the public, so if either of you don't wish to be filmed, please let us know. If you sit at the table to give deputations, we will see the back of your head. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've got an apology for absence from Councillor Steve Pitt, who is flu-ridden, and we decided it would be better that he did not come and give it to everybody else. Declarations of interest. I have a declaration of interest in relation to item 5, which is South Sea flood defences, in that we have had a deputation from the LEP, the Solent LEP, but at the LEP, and I'm a director at the LEP, but I am excluded from any decisions about this on the basis of conflict of interest, so I'm excluded from decisions at the LEP. So, Peter, I think I'm okay to stay, is that correct?
I'm fine with that.
Christopher?
Chair, can I just mention, I don't think it's a deputation from the LEP, it's a letter to the Chief Executive in relation to the report.
Okay, fine. Joe, are you treating it as a deputation?
I think it was circulated to all Cabinet members to be aware of when making a decision today.
Excellent.
So written deputation.
Okay, lovely. And the late Chief Executive is now here.
Apologies.
And I'm sure will give us advice on this, Mr. Chief Executive. No, okay, we'll pass on that then. Folks, okay, so that's declaration of interest. Records of previous decisions. Colleagues, are you happy with the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you. Do we want to introduce ourselves? Yes, that's a good point, Rob. Thank you. Because there may be more than Scott watching on the telly. So I'm Gerald Van Jackson, I'm leader of the council.
Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Education.
Tom Wood, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
So I'm Lee Hunt and I'm the Cabinet Member for Community Safety. Good afternoon.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Darren Sanders, the Cabinet Member for Housing.
Lynn Stagg, Traffic and Transportation.
Would you like to introduce yourselves, ladies and gentlemen?
I'm Tim Raw, Marketing and Communications.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Mary Devaney, Strategic Developments.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
David Williams, the late Chief Executive.
Pedro Alcee, Solicitor.
Joan Waldsmith, Democratic Services.
Excellent. Okay, folks, item number 4 is Leamington House. We have a deputation from Mr. Darcy, if you'd like to come forward and grab a seat. Mr. Darcy, I think the sensible thing to do is hear the deputation first, if that's okay, and then we'll ask James to introduce the item and we'll move forward from there. So, Mr. Darcy, welcome. You have 6 minutes, starting from now.
Councillors, thank you for permission to speak at this meeting of Cabinet today. As a resident of St Thomas Ward, I just wanted to applaud all the work the City Council Housing Department has done to hear the views of so many local residents. When I've been talking to the residents myself, they've told me how pleased that they are that the City Council has bothered to ask their views and about what should happen on to Horatio Leamington House and the surrounding areas. I think the easy answer when the cladding was removed from the tower blocks was to say, let's ignore the weakness in the concrete in these towers, or just sell them on to student flats. As I understand it, both of these suggestions were made by councillors here in Portsmouth. I'm actually really glad and pleased that the recommendations here today and the actions that you've taken have ignored these short-sighted views. Residents have been made clear that the housing, they want to see council housing replaced here, and I'm fully in support of that. They said they want to see decent flats housing with outside spaces and parking, and fully support that. They said that they don't want to see student halls of residence here, and I support that. Also just like to highlight the importance of disabled access. I was recently supporting a fellow resident with a social housing application who's has a father with dementia. Her current home is on the second floor, has no lift, only concrete stairs, which both her and her father has fallen down a few times. So I would say that there needs to be consideration for both physical and neurodiverse conditions. I hope you, as the City Council Cabinet, listen to local views of residents, but also recognise the huge need for social housing in the city. Please take a sensible long-term approach to this area. Wider generation is something to be explored, but please take next steps, get the design made, and then test them out with local residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Darcy. Thanks. James, do you want to introduce?
Okay, thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, Cabinet. So the report that you've got before you is actually a joint report from the Housing and Neighbourhood and Building Services Directorate and also the Regeneration Directorate regarding Leamington House and Horatia House, and I'll just very briefly introduce it. The primary purpose of the report is actually to bring to you the results of the engagement exercise that was undertaken during the summer and recommend the next steps to take that feedback forward. The report also provides the opportunity to update you all on the other key strands of works at the blocks. So in the background sections, 4.1, you've got an update on the decommissioning and securing of the blocks, and the key message there is the blocks are empty and fully secured now. In section 4.2, we've updated you on the options appraisal for the demolition of the blocks, and Ridge are continuing to work on the options appraisal and feasibility for the demolition, and that work is expected back in December of this year, and will provide you then with the demolition method, timescales and costs associated with that work. The main body of the report, though, is in section 5, and that's titled Resident Engagement. And the report provides you with the results of all of that engagement exercise with the local community and also the wider community. The engagement exercise was undertaken by officers during June and July, and then the collation occurred through August. And we used very open questions to seek views on how to re-provide housing when the two towers are brought down, and also thoughts on wider area improvements. You have got access as a hard copy to the full engagement report, so every single piece of feedback and how that was collated is before you, and that goes into all of the detail. It also groups the feedback into categories of responder as well, so you can specifically look at what the immediate community said, what businesses and residents within 500 metres of the block said, etc., etc. In section 5.5 of the Cabinet report, we just summarise some of that feedback for you. So there are 7 key themes that emerge consistently, and all of that feedback has been communicated back to the responders, and section 6 in the report gives you some indication of the process that we've used to do that. If I may, Leader, it just is an opportunity for me just to publicly thank all of the officers that were involved in that exercise, but also specifically Mary Devaney, who's with me, and Tim Raw. Both of them work in the Regeneration Directorate and did the lion's share of the work in engaging the community, and actually I think the results speak for themselves in terms of the breadth of response that we received. It's a really good piece of work. So just turning to the recommendation in section 2 and specifically 2.1.5, the recommendation is to take those results to form the brief for architects to move into a master planning phase. So in other words, the design for the replacement of the towers, the exploration of those wider area improvements, and that work will take into consideration all of the feedback received to date. It would also provide opportunities for the community to remain fully involved and engaged in that master planning work. And then you will receive those designs at a later date once that work's complete. There are no substantive changes to the report, so officers are with me should there be any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I know there's one small amendment that is going to come forward to one of the recommendations, but it doesn't change the nature of it. It's just a wording thing. Just from my point of view, I think this is a very helpful report. I think it is good that we are moving to try to make sure that we provide the social housing that's needed. That the number of families I talk to who desperately in need of somewhere decent to live, and they just can't afford the private sector. So as I had a family of mum and dad and 4 kids come to visit me, living in a 2-bedroom flat in a tower block in the city, and trying to bring up 4 kids when they have to share a bedroom is not great. And yet they're very low in terms of chances of being able to get somewhere else, because we just don't have it, because so many places, so many flats and houses have been sold off over the years and not replaced, and that's very, very bad. I'm really pleased that we're looking at social housing here. I'm sure we'll be a mix, but I think there was great fear from the local community that this would just become another area of student housing, and I'm pleased that we're saying that's not what's going to happen. That this is about trying to make sure that there are homes for local families, which is really, really important. I've had several people say to me, if we were going to get rid of the towers, can we not do what lots of other cities do and blow them up? But I'm told we're not allowed to, because there are lots of other people who live very close by, and it could be very dangerous. So that if they're going to have to be dismantled, to make sure that that's done safely, it'll take longer than the 1 second or 10-second push of a button, but it has to be done safely. And I'm very pleased to look that we're looking to do, not to replace big tower blocks, but to look at smaller things, more green space, more parking. And I think the 2 things can be done together. You can have parking underneath green space, as we're talking about at Tipner West. And also looking to make sure that it's a really attractive place for people to live. So I think this is a very good thing, and I completely echo the words from Mr. Darcy. I think it is very important that we didn't take the short-term view to say, actually, the concrete isn't great, but actually it's been there for 50 years. People can continue to live there. I think after Grenfell Tower, that would have been hugely irresponsible of us. And also the idea that we could just flog it off to the private sector or to student housing, as suggested by some of our colleagues, was not the right thing to do. We need to meet the needs of local residents. I know both, so many thanks to all the officers. Just as an incidental, one of the things I'm really interested in is that you're getting 80 to 90% engagement from local residents in this consultation. In other consultations we run in different parts of the council, we get disappointed because we only get 15%. And maybe there is some learning that can be done within the council about how to do consultations to get 80 or 90% engagement with, and that's something I'm sure David, the Chief Executive, you might be able to take up to be able to pass learning around from different bits of the council. So I'm first of all going to go to Darren as the portfolio holder, because I know you've got an amendment, and then to Rob.
Thank you, Gerald, and I would echo many of your comments. As someone whose immediate family lives in Somerstown and who first moved to the area in 1984, I know that many residents there are just fed up with people doing things to them rather than involving them in their future. I don't think any of us wanted to be in this position, but I'm delighted that we're able to take forward things in a way that does just that. And not in sense of people going through hundreds of meetings and seeing PowerPoints and just getting bored and then leaving, but in terms of real and active engagement. And Gerald, you're right, this is only the start of the process, this is not the end. And I'm delighted that we're actually going to include what people have said as part of the feedback, because this is a long-term exercise. And I want people to come to this area. People who live there know this is a great area, but many other people in the city don't. I think this is a real chance to help shape the city's needs whilst including the views of the people who matter, the people who live locally. And I would echo your comments about the excellence of this community engagement exercise. I have one minor amendment, which I think reading through the report actually reflects what local people want, which is go to page 2 of the Cabinet report, which is recommendation 5, italics 7, which says re-providing the social housing lost when the tower blocks go. I think reading the report we can be a bit more ambitious than that, and I think we can say we should, my amendment will be to change that sentence to say re-provide at least the amount of social housing lost when the tower blocks go. We don't know if we can do that in future, but I think it's important that we tell everyone, just as we're telling housing associations, that actually what needs to happen are homes people can really afford, ideally at social rents as often as possible. And if that means we wind up re-providing only what we've lost, that's fine. But I want us to send out a signal that actually we want to try and provide homes that people can afford. I don't think that upsets the balance of what we're doing going forwards, but I think it does reflect what people want. But the work so far has been excellent, and I'm delighted that we're not going down the route of actually ruining the lives of people who are within 50 metres of this place, which we would do if we were knocking them down with a plunger, but we're actually going to deconstruct them, and that is the safe and sensible way forwards. But I'm delighted with this report. I echo Mr Darcy's comments, and I'm delighted that people in Somerstown are actually being involved rather than have people who never live there doing things to them. Thank you, Gerald.
Thanks. Rob Wood, as one of the local ward councillors.
Can I just say, as one of the ward councillors, could have been a bit of a disaster with what happened in our ward. And can I say this has been the most smooth operation from your side, and you've done a fantastic job. As a ward councillor, we've had no issues whatsoever from residents. In fact, there's a real buzz, as Mr Darcy said there, in engaging people about what's going to happen. They've got a real buzz about the future, and as a ward councillor, I'm really looking forward to how this unfolds. So well done. Thank you, team.
Mr Tom Wood, also ward councillor.
Just very much what Rob said, to echo the work that you did on the consultation was absolutely fantastic, getting that level of response to open questions, and then the way that it was distilled down into something that can be most useful. It was a really outstanding piece of work that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, are you happy with the recommendations as amended by Councillor Darren Sanders? Colleagues, are you happy with that? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving on to the next issue, flood defences in Southsea. David.
Thank you. I think, first of all, what I will do is I'll just very briefly address the representation that's been received from the LEP. Chris will then address the issues around the request to Cabinet and hopefully on to full Council for a draw on the Council's capital programme that will enable the full business case to be submitted to the Environment Agency. The response from the LEP, I have to say I'm very disappointed with it and its tone, but I do accept that some of the constraints are from central government. They're not from the LEP themselves. I think just to put it into context, this is something that we've been engaged with the LEP on since at least 2015, and both the Council and I think the Environment Agency have been expecting funding support to be secured from from the LEP. And the only reason there's any reference to the LEP in the report is because we haven't secured that funding, does lead to the need now to make the request through yourselves and on to Council. Because the Environment Agency and the Treasury will not entertain the full business case unless the source of the funding can be guaranteed. So we end up in this ludicrous circular situation where the LEP are also saying that they won't provide any funding unless all the other funding can be guaranteed. Having said all that, we have made progress with the LEP. Since 2015, we've made progress in terms of the removal now of the requirement from the LEP for a 30% local contribution to the scheme. You can imagine the scale of 30% of a circa £120 million programme was quite an ambitious expectation. Progress has also been made in removing the requirement for additional new housing. In the letter they refer to the 1,000 dwellings. The 1,000 dwellings was put in there because of that desire from the LEP to have some sort of relationship to new housing. It was a calculation of the expected windfall housing during the life of the project. Obviously this is a project with a very long life, and by very definition you can't show on a map where windfall housing may occur. So we have made some progress there. In August 2018, the chair of the Environment Agency wrote to the LEP, impressing on them the importance of the scheme. She actually said she hoped that it would be considered as a priority to ensure that the city remains resilient to climate change over the next 100 years and safeguards its position as a key economic provider within the Solent region. So we're making some progress. We've still got some hurdles to get over with the LEP. Planning permission is in, but it is highly unlikely that full detailed planning permission with all reserved matters cleared is going to be achieved in the timescale that the LEP are expecting. And I have to say I do think that's quite an exceptional request. There will be spend of the sort of funding that we're seeking from the LEP within the timescale that they're indicating, which is by the 31st of March 2021. But clearly on a 4.5 kilometre scheme, it is only going to be one part of that frontage that will be commenced during that period. I've mentioned the issue about the Environment Agency funding. We're going to have to resolve that somehow with the LEP, otherwise we'll end up in a circular argument and nothing will ever get built. So we'll continue to work with the LEP. I will respond to Gary, the chair of the LEP's letter, and hopefully we will be able to find a form of wording that the Local Enterprise Partnership will be more comfortable with if you agree to put the recommendation forward to full council. So we don't want to fall out with them, but we do need a bit of give and take from them in order to be able to get a scheme of this complexity and this scale over the line. The contingency figure within this project will be probably 2 or 3 times the amount of funding that we're likely to get from the LEP. And as members know who followed the course of this project through its long life, very often when we do drill testing, we find we're drilling through air. Such is the level of uncertainty in terms of a civil engineering project of this nature. But we've got huge support from the Environment Agency for it. The full business case is now ready to go in, and I am very hopeful that we will get the support of the LEP to make a meaningful contribution to the securing of the safety of all of those properties and the businesses within that area, and also the significance of that to the future of the economy of the city and the region. So, if people stop investing in part of Portsmouth, it'll have a knock-on implication to investment in the rest of Portsmouth. That we do not want to see. Thank you.
Thank you much, David. Colleagues, Mr. Ashmore, as portfolio holder, in charge of this.
Thank you, David. First of all,
the whole sea defence thing, I've said over and over again how important it is, how vital it is that this needs to be achieved, that we all need to work, to get it done. It's not just a Southsea thing. This, it's our waterfront. It's Portsmouth Beach. So it's really important. And I don't think the people who are behind it get enough credit. So I just thank you to anyone out there who's been working with the Southsea Coastal Scheme. It's a really tough thing, as we've just discovered what David's been telling us with the LEP and trying to find funding for this and making sure everything's all secure. But, through it all, you've managed to have consultations with people and go along with people on the actual scheme itself. But thank you for coming in, David, and explaining to us, some of the constraints on it, which is why we've got this letter from that LEP before us. But yes, it is something that we need to do. It is something that's important, and as you say, it's a knock-on effect. It's Southsea Seafront's one of our USPs for Portsmouth. So we are really dedicated to doing this. So excellent.
Thank you, and may I echo your thanks to everybody involved in this. I think this has been a good piece of work, and I think people have felt around the city that their views have been listened to. Lynn.
When I read the letter last night, my first reaction was, let Portsmouth sink. That seems to be the message coming across from the LEP, which is incredibly sad. One of my sons sent me a link a while ago to an interactive world map which you could change sea level, and the note that he sent with it was, if sea level rises, Mother Stag, by 1.5 metres, you'll be the proud owner of a waterside property. But I don't think I really want that, not living in Copner anyway. But, we want to release land to build more houses and businesses, etc. But pointless, unless we've got the sea defences there, it'll be underwater anyway. So, it's pointless putting the houses and the businesses there. So it seems to me, a short-term thinking, it's a catch-22 situation. We need the money to close the gap, to build the defences, for the rest of it to happen. But they're saying, well, because you can't guarantee this, that and the other, we're not going to give it to you. To me, it's mad. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Matthew?
Thank you, and as a seafront councillor, I've got obviously the best 3 miles of seafront we have in the city. A ward councillor which takes in the eastern extremity of the sea defence project. Obviously, I echo the thanks to everyone who's been involved in the sea defence's work. And like Lynn, expressed and David has mentioned, my grave disappointment over this letter from the LEP. And I thank you, David, for clearing up some of the where they claim are factual inaccuracies, which I was looking through it and I couldn't see anything that I would consider to be factually inaccurate in our reports in front of us. I think it was a letter that struck me as one of saying why we can't help you with your funding, and putting barriers in the way rather than looking forwards. I think particularly the one that got me was around the historic England that we have to do around that, about our ground conditions, things that we absolutely have to do because we have a extraordinarily historic and significant seafronts in Southsea. And we have to adhere by requirements from the government in the place, or Quango in the place of Historic England, which is obviously government funded, and I think it's once again a situation, as again the Chief Executive has mentioned, about government requirements from the Treasury that they're using to go against other government requirements from other parts of government, because we've been here before where government doesn't talk to each other, and that is something that we then end up, if we don't have somewhere like the LEP working with local governments and instead take the side of national government, this is where we end up, and we end up in a complete mess, because we're coming from two completely different situations. And of course we've got the Environment Agency, who's completely in favour of everything we're doing and thinks it's absolutely wonderful. So I absolutely support the recommendation. I'm sorry it's had to come to this point, in the recommendation and the fact we haven't managed to yet secure funding from the Salient LEP. But I do hope that they will look on this far more positively, that these sea defences are for the economic future of this city. And after all, they're a local enterprise partnership. They're a partnership between councils and businesses, and surely that is what should be at the very paramount of what everything they do is the economic well-being of our communities. And I think that what we are doing in this report does that.
Brilliant. Darren.
Sorry, Joe, Matt has just covered what I wanted to say.
Okay, colleagues, are we happy with this report? I think we send this on to full council, is that correct? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, are you happy to send this on to full council? Thank you very much indeed. Item 6, Revenue Budget Monitoring 1920 Quarter 1. Chris, we're sending this on to full council as well, is that correct? No. It doesn't go to full council, only here. Why is that?
Because this is the overall position on the administration's budget.
Fine, I do what I'm told. Fine. Chris, do you want to just walk us through this then?
Yeah. You are right, though, in fact, that previously these reports did go on to council, but it was there's no decision-making ability for council over them, so they now reside at cabinet.
Okay. I think we might need to go and look at that again, because I'd want to know how particularly opposition parties would have an ability to input into this. So anyway, let's come back to that then. Okay.
Okay, so this is the position of the council's current year's budget as at the end of quarter 1. So it's a little bit back in time. At the end of quarter 1, our forecast was that in overall terms, the council's financial position against its budget for the current year would be £2.5 million overspent by the time we reach the end of the year. We have similar key challenges from previous periods, but obviously to a lesser extent this year than in previous years. So children's services, we have a forecast overspend of around about £1.5 million, and in adult social care, we have a forecast overspend of £2.5 million. It's probably important to say that, at least in relation to children's services, their forecast spend for this year is in overall terms is actually less than last year. So progress is being made in children's services at an overall level. Those two forecast overspends, obviously, they between them amount to £4 million on their own, and they're offset by a couple of areas where we have either a release from, or a potential release from contingency, because we always anticipated that there would be challenges with adults and children's social care in delivering their overall recovery plans. So there's some set aside in the council's contingency for this exact reason, and that amounts to 1.8 million, so that offsets the overall position. And on top of that, there's around about £300,000 worth of additional income from the council's property investment portfolio that again is mitigating the overall position. I think what's equally important is if we look forward and we say, what does this mean for the council's future financial planning? At the time that this report was prepared, and obviously I said it only takes us up to quarter 1, at that point in time we hadn't had the spending review announcement. So the spending review announcement happened around about a month ago. And within that announcement there is additional funding, but it's only announced for 1 year at this stage, but there's additional funding for both adults and children's social care. So the conclusions in this report mention that should the council seek to take advantage of the flexibility that's also been announced to increase the council tax by a further 2% and passport that funding onto adult social care, then the position for adult social care in future years ought to be stabilised. In addition, if the new funding that's been announced, and it's only been announced, as I said, for 1 year only for next year, for both adults and children's social care, If that continues beyond next year, then that also ought to stabilise the children's social care position as well. So I think at this stage, I think we can say that the position for next year, the budget for next year, looks okay, but obviously we'll be looking to the government to honour their additional funding commitments for years beyond next year in order to bring the overall social care position to a balanced one going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's very helpful and very useful. Colleagues, Rob?
Chris, just a quick question, going back to the sea defences in relation to the budget as a capital sum or something like that. If the mitigations of the 20 million or whatever it is that you're going to try and realise the value of don't realise the value, I assume that we will have to, if we're going to go ahead with the sea defence, we'll have to factor that in some form of budgetary form? Or I'm just trying to work out where that's going to go if you can't realise it from other sources.
So, in essence, the council will have to underwrite the additional 17 million that's been requested so that the sea defences scheme can go forward. I think if I just contextualise it first and then I'll answer the question later on. So, in seeking to underwrite the position, I think it's important to understand that, yes, there's an additional ask from the council of 17 million, but there are potential savings opportunities of 37 million. So that 37 million breaks down into two strands, really. Within the bid, there's what's described as a 17 million pound risk pot. So things that may or may not occur, you have to price that in when you submit a bid to government so that they've got surety that the whole scheme will be delivered and it's got funding security. The other element is what's described as potential for value engineering, and I think all of the contractors that submitted a bid have suggested that there's potential for value engineering ranging between about 16 to 22 million pounds. So there's reasonable expectation that that would be able to be managed through the whole scheme. On top of that, the way that the procurement is run with the 6 individual stages, you can seek to, if absolutely necessary, rescope each stage as you go through. So it gives you much more control over the overall funding envelope and to be able to manage the overall cost exposure to the council. However, if all of those mitigation mechanisms are not successful, then the council will have to fund it either through some form of capital resource, which could be either cash-based, real money-based, or borrowing. If it is borrowing, that will add to the council's savings requirements in future years because the council will have to service the debt on that borrowing.
Okay. Okay, colleagues, anything else? No? Okay, thank you much indeed, colleagues. There was one potential additional item coming here which we were alerted to yesterday, which had to go to full council, which is about the purchase of a crane for the port. But what we're going to do is to make sure that people have got notice to be able to look at that. We're going to have a leaders portfolio meeting on Friday at 11:45, and it's on the agenda of the full council for Tuesday of next week. So colleagues, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you, Mr. Darcy, for coming to speak. Thank you, Fiona, for coming to report us.